Welcome. Hello, friends. I'm Stephen Reily, Director of the Speed Art Museum, and I am delighted to be joined in this month's Director's Cut conversation by my own colleague, Toya Northington. Toya has been working alongside of us at the Speed for a couple of years now. She came to the Speed with an incredible background with a master's in social work, her own career as an artist and researcher, and the founder of a nonprofit, arts-oriented nonprofit called Art Thrust. Toya immediately put our community engagement work into high gear, leading our Speed for All program, our community connections art making programs, and really launching us into an NEA Our Town grant with an artist in residence program in Russell. She had a full plate, but I knew that Toya was the one person within our colleague base who could manage the community engagement work for our current exhibit, Promise, Witness, and Remembrance. So she agreed after a little thinking, and we reorganized her work temporarily to come on full-time as the community engagement strategist, working with me and our guest curator, Allison Glenn, a community engagement steering committee, a national advisory panel, and 80+ colleagues to pull this work together in only a matter of months. Tonight, I'm going to talk to Toya, about one aspect. There are so many stories in this exhibit. And one of the things Toya led the steering committee on was actually informing the selection of artworks that make up the exhibit Promise, Witness, Remembrance. It was an unusual format, and Allison Glenn made herself willing to present repeatedly to the steering committee to listen and to adapt her plans, the artists and the artworks that were included in the exhibit. In a future date, we'll talk about some of the other important works of the steering committee and the research committee, the programming and research they formulated, the ways that they're giving the community ways to process, the artists who are going to be commissioned to respond to artworks in the exhibit. But I just want to talk about the unique role that the steering committee played in selecting artworks for the show this evening. So thank you, Toya, for joining me for that conversation and joining this effort to begin with.
Sure, thanks for having me. It's exciting. I'm glad we're going to do this.
So tell me a little bit, well, I know, but remind for our audience's sake, talk about, from the very beginning, it was towards the end of the year, you took on this new challenge and opportunity, and you said, here's how I want to put together a steering committee. And talk a little about how you did it and who ended up joining it.
Yeah. So starting this project, I knew that there's a couple of hurdles or pitfalls that large institutions fall into. So when you do these big projects, especially if it's something around diversity or social practice, they'll hire someone. There'll be this Black elite person, and that person will represent all of Black community or all whatever that community they're seeking to reach. And with this particular subject and issue and knowing how Breonna Taylor touched our community, I knew that was too great for me to take on. I'm one person, right? I'm one perspective, I'm one opinion, and I have my own methods. So from the beginning, I knew it was important to pull together a diverse committee, right? Not just kind of the superficial committee that just has the name, but no authority or no autonomy over the project, but a real steering committee with different perspectives, different ages, different backgrounds, different disciplines, no discipline, right? Community members that have perspectives and opinions that you may not have on a lot of committees, that have a lot to say and a lot to add. And so I put together a wish list of what type of voices need to be at the table. And so it couldn't be perfect, right? I couldn't have everyone represented, but how can I get as many people at the table as possible? And then whoever I couldn't grab, I would try to grab them through the engagement surveys and the focus groups, things like that.
So you had members, you also told me, and I remember you said, if we don't have leaders from the protest movement, they're not going to feel, they're going to come at this exhibit and feeling like we didn't want to listen to them. And they've had the biggest role in the community. So you had a handful of them, and who else?
We had members from the protest community. And, you know, there's a small representation from the protest community, but many others were asked. You know, I sent out 30 invites. I had people from research communities. I had people who were academics. I had people that were organizational leaders, and people in mental health, and people who were just active in the community, people you know, and who are active and they needed to be at the table. And then we had Breonna Taylor's family, right? So that was key because we can think of all kinds of things that sound good to us, but at the end of the day, this was for Breonna, right? Breonna's family. And we wanted to make sure that we represented her in an authentic way.
Sure. You put it together so beautifully. And even though they weren't selected for any particular art background, from your very first meeting, they had some strong questions and thoughts about the art that would be included or not included in the exhibit, right?
Yes, and there were a few artists. I did forget that. There are some artists as part of the community as well. But I was surprised. You know, I was all prepared for us to talk about these social justice issues. And I was like, yes, what are the things that are important to us? And we spent the whole session, hour and a half, talking about really imbalances in the art world, right? You know, how this shows up in museums, how this shows up in galleries, how that artists have been marginalized, especially artists of color. So it was on top of the list of like, okay, if you're going to do this exhibition on social justice, don't just talk about them over there, what they're doing and what collectively the world is doing. What part do you all play in this?
So Allison had come to the table with a vision that was a little different, right? So she was bringing had an idea of a lot of Black artists, but not only Black artists, but the committee had a different view.
Yes. And I think because the community lives in the context of what's happened here, right? When we started this project, it was still really raw here. Yeah. You know, still a lot of pain, still a lot of hurt. It still is, but we were fresh on it at that time. And so it was important, if we were going to take on this and really do it justice, we had to be true about the representation, right? Everyone who came to the table had to be considered intentionally, what they brought, who they represented, why they were represented in the work, and how the community would read it, right? Because it wasn't just about us as an institution. We also had to remember that this is our bridge and our trust with the community that may not know us very well.
And Allison, to her credit, you know, realized that she is not a Louisvillian. She comes from somewhere else. She was bringing a national perspective. She needed to hear the local, and it wasn't necessarily what a national kind of perspective wanted to hear at first. And I think that was one of the rules of the steering committee, is to say, you know, that's just not where Louisville's at right now. This is a moment. If we were going to ever have a moment where you just declared this is going to be an exhibit with all Black artists, this is that moment. And we can understand why you might want to do it differently. And she adapted, so people should know. In fact, with the steering committee's approval, there's only one white artist, who happens to be Tyler Girth, the young man who died photographing the protests. So really, the exhibit also tells the story of several other people who died tragically, kind of because of the protests and of events and being swept up in the movement following the killing of Breonna Taylor. But it wasn't just the identity of the artists. And so it is now 17 Black artists and Tyler Girth in the exhibit, and really important, Allison did follow through on that. But they also brought another local perspective about the artists included.
Yeah, I mean, it was about, and that goes back to correcting the imbalances. So we know about museums' histories. They're not, and not just us, just as an institution, we're not known for elevating local, right? Usually you don't get success till you move away, you find your success somewhere else, and then you're brought into the museum system. There's a whole structure behind that. But it was important to say who is here that has been overlooked, right? Or who is from Louisville that is ready to be launched, ready to be in this higher level of art um, society, but hasn't been given that chance, right? And that goes back to correcting the imbalance. So not just the local people that everyone knows, that everyone loves and has seen over years, but how can we elevate new faces, like new voices? So this is a launching pad. And it really goes back to how we are thinking about uprising and social justice here. What's that next level where we can elevate the community? And this was our way to do it through the art world.
And I love that it included, as you said, and we'll talk about some of those specific examples. One of them is a museum quality, an artist who's been shown in exhibits named Noel Anderson, who's a professor at NYU. Allison had a take on him. She knew Noel Anderson's work. She didn't know he was from Louisville. I didn't know his work, so I was embarrassed to say now we have 5 works by him in the exhibit, and that's an impact, where even great curators don't always know the dots to connect. So the steering committee helped make that happen. But more in another way that really shaped the exhibit, they said we want to see one way to include artists as photographers who were photographing the protest and the movement following the killing of Breonna Taylor. So talk a little about how that went, because then Allison said, I can't do that because the way a curator does that is has to live in the community, get to know artists over time, visit their studios, see their shows, watch their careers develop. She said, there's, understandably, I don't have the kind of time that curators need to do that. So the steering committee said, we'll help.
Yeah, and it was all, I can say everything was accelerated. And it was all so very non-traditional. So it's not often, and to give Allison credit, it's not often that you not only have a steering committee to get perspective, we weren't really asking. These weren't like statements. Could you please, could you consider it? We were like, no, this is our list of things that we would like to see in this exhibition. And one of it was we need to elevate someone who hasn't been elevated before. And also, this happened here because of the protests, right? This exhibition, we wouldn't know you and you wouldn't know us and you wouldn't know Breonna Taylor if there weren't protests here. And it's because the institution is so close to Injustice Square, you can't ignore that. We can hear it. It's marching past our street. We've got staff in the protest. In fact, we have staff in the protest photos. So it's not something distant to us. This is part of the story. And you can't tell a story about Breonna Taylor without telling the story about the protests. So we said, okay, well, let's make this happen. How can we make it happen? And Allison said, hey, well, do you know some photographers? And actually, the steering committee compiled a list and everybody put their suggestions on there. And we sent that to Allison and said, okay, these are our suggestions. And Allison was able to pick her own images from that, right? We didn't step into that part. That's her creative vision. And we didn't want to have that much control, but we did want to make sure that when people walk into that exhibition, they are seen. And if we didn't have enough local Louisville seen, then it wouldn't have felt like it was for them. It would have been for us, right? And that wasn't the tone we wanted to build with our community.
And you see now with the exhibit open, it's so interesting to watch. There's a big percentage of the visitors that go straight to those photographs to see themselves, see someone they knew. But I also like what you said, because in the end, the committee and Allison worked in such a collaborative way. They said, we can be your stringers, like we'll be your studio visitors. We're not going to tell you which ones are best. They gave her a lot of photographers and so much content because photography was kind of well suited for it because you don't have to see it in person. And she could look at so much to say she chose 5 photographers, 4 in addition to Tyler Girth. I remember she had 4 and she said, I'm not finding a woman. I can't do this. We got to have a woman represented. But she found Tia Yarrow, whose work is there, and now it's going to be featured, I think. Was featured in the exhibit. And so I think that's the other balancing act, that this is, as you said, it's so not typical, right? On the one hand, you all weren't saying, please, curator, here's our wish list. You were saying we need to see this. And she was saying, well, this is how curators need to work. Can you adapt to help me do that? And then they said, yes, if we give you enough content, can you do your job? Because we respect your independence as a curator. And then it worked out. So it's a beauty to behold that corner and how she's situated against Terry Atkins' work, which is a monument to the first protest for Black Lives, or maybe in 1917, New York. So there's a wonderful kind of interplay of contemporary art.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a dialogue that happens. And just like we're creating a dialogue between the local, the personal, and the national, there's a dialogue between artists, right? And one person starts off that conversation and the others continue it. But because the exhibition was rooted in now, we need to just show how people are expressing that or are interacting with that content now. And I think there are probably a lot of female artists and photographers who were there at the protest. But that's another place where it's easier to get exposure if you're a male photographer, right? And a male artist, than if you are a female photographer, a female artist. So it's all those little things that slide into the system that keep people hidden that we're just starting to uncover. And it's not until you realize that, hey, wait, why don't we know who these female photographers are, that we can correct it? Because if we don't know there's an issue there, we can't really solve the problem.
I just like, it's a good point, because museums, I think, used to say, I'm sure they're good Black artists out there. I just don't know who they are. It's like, you go find them. And I just to mention the story you said, when we had our very first tour for our colleagues of the exhibit, one of our friends and colleagues said, I don't know if you all know this, but I'm in one of these protest photos, and there she is holding a camera. So she in turn was a protest photographer. I want to wrap up with, I think, in some ways, not the most interesting, but the most unexpected request or response that the committee had to Allison. I think she presented was pretty much, well, I guess she thought it was a near complete checklist, and they had a very specific kind of aesthetic reaction.
Oh, yeah. I think one thing I feel that people underestimate is that they'll say, oh, only trained artists or, only trained historians understand art. But contemporary art, no, you can see it and have a reaction to it, and you understand what speaks to you. And if you lean into it, you can really get the feel of what that space will be and what, the artist is saying. And so when Allison presented the checklist, there was a reaction like, oh, wait, we had spent so many weeks talking about Breonna Taylor and started off saying, who is Breonna Taylor? As a person, what does she mean? And we've written it down. So when we seen the exhibition checklist, we wanted to see Breonna, right? We didn't want to see like a general version of racism or social justice. We were like, okay, where is Breonna represented in this checklist? And of course, we have Breonna Taylor's family. So in case you don't take our word for it, we're going to ask, was this Breonna? And one of the things that was called out is that in our attempt to decolonize the space, which I'm all for, leading the charge for that, it was the dark kind of corridor in the old galleries, right? So the space was dark, but the art was dark too. Like it was very monotone and monochromatic. And of course, with a lot of this subject matter, it leans that way. But the idea was that we can't forget that this exhibition started because of Breonna Taylor. And it was important to redefine the narrative around her as a person in her life. And so the call out was like, Breonna was lively. Breonna was fun. Breonna loved color. She loved to laugh. So we need some more life into this exhibition. We need more color. We need more movement. We need more light. And one of the things I tell people is that the witness section, if you're looking for the steering committee, and people always ask, well, which parts were you all? That witness section, that's us. So when you see Sam Gilliam, when you see the process photographs, when you see Nick Cave, when you see Noel Anderson, that was direct steering committee. Like those are selections that come from our feedback. There was color, there is whimsicalness. We're pushing boundaries and expectations. There's power and privilege that's been elevated, right? All of those things are part of the witness section.
And the exhibit got better for it, and to her credit, Allison adapted and like a great curator can, she figured out. She looked to our own collection, and we'll show a picture during this that she pulled up one of the unbelievable Sam Gilliam's we own. Sam Gilliam, another Louisville native who grew up here. His carousel piece from 1969. You're right. There's so many centerpieces of that witness section, but his is just full of color. We've never shown it completely away from the wall, so you can walk around it now. Really, I remember my first conversation with Breonna Taylor's mother, Tamika Palmer, and she said what she loved about Amy Sherrill's portrait was that it depicted her daughter's uplifting spirit. I think what you're saying is the exhibit needed to do that. And Sam's work does, while also showing that in 1969, an amazing Black artist's response to a very similar time, assassination, civil unrest, racial unrest, could be an act of abstract painting in color. And it could be brightness and fabric and drapery in the galleries, taking up a lot of space. So I hope people will come and see that and know that this exhibit is, in a very traditional way, represents the vision of a very gifted curator, but one who adapted and flowed, and an exhibit also that I have never seen a community voice shape and reshape over a months-long period as we got to opening day. So there's so many stories to tell out of the steering committee, and we'll reconnect for more of those. But thank you for sharing, so people can see this exhibit. You can feel community in it, but you really know the steps you took and led. Thank you, Toya Northington.
Thank you.
I am Jermaine Fowler, a public educator and creator of the Humanity Archive. It's where I tell the stories of the historically unheard in our recent and distant past, and I'm always trying to highlight the joys of humanity, but I'm never afraid to talk about the tragic inhumanity of our past. It is an honor to be here, but what brings me here is a sad and somber reality. And I hope in this talk that I can some way move you, or maybe even unsettle you, but also I can connect you to your history, to our history here in Louisville as a community, connect you to some better vision for the future. Now, there are three themes that run through this exhibition that are relevant to where we are right now. One is the extraordinary promise made by America as a nation. Every generation since our nation's founding has heard the promise. You know that promise. It says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The second is this theme of witness, and I'm a storyteller, so when I immerse myself in the narratives of people, and I'm talking about people who were born, who suffered, who worked, who lived, who laughed, who loved, and who died, lives full of possibilities and failures, people who slept and wept and worked and breathed. When you deal with the reality of those lives lived, you're going to bear witness to some suffering and some misfortune. You're going to bear witness to some injustice. The third theme is remembrance, and it has been said that the living owes it to those who are no longer able to speak to tell their story for them. And this is a heavy moment as we come together to commemorate the life and legacy of Breonna Taylor and so many others, but I am also buoyed up by the memories of the joy of the families, of the kindness and the outpouring of love. And here we are at a museum, and some say that art is the most powerful form of remembrance because it does not have to do with the rational. It has to do with the real emotion and raw power of what has been and what could have been. And it was Nina Simone who said it is an artist's duty to reflect the times in which they live. So here we are now, reflecting the times. We are here wrestling with the reality that Black Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be murdered by police than white Americans. How do you explain the discrimination, disenfranchisement, and disregard for Black life in America? How do you explain the fact that only 1.5% of officers are even ever charged with a crime or even investigated a lot of times? So in history, the police have always been immune to justice, but Black people have never been immune to injustice. And then we talk about America's broken promise. And when you saw the Taylor family after the killing of Breonna, you didn't see the spirit of vengeance. You saw the spirit of love and justice. We saw that once again, America has broken its promise. That promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness crumbled into the dust of death, loss, and despair. America has broken its promise to a young woman who had a future and a life in front of her, robbed of joy, of motherhood, of love, of family, friendship, and the precious gift of life itself. America has broken its promise to all those victims of police violence. We know that this all stems from a long legacy in law enforcement where white and suburban communities get served and protected while Black and impoverished communities get contained and arrested. The Louisville police force has a history of treating its Black residents with indignity and inhumanity all the way back to 1850. When federally appointed slave catchers patrolled the Ohio River daily looking for Black fugitives. It goes back that far. And we realize that Breonna Taylor and so many other Black people in history were never part of the promise to begin with. Now we are in a bleak moment in Louisville and in America, but the only way forward is to move forward with the kind of love that helps us muster the courage to bear witness to the truth. And it is here today that we gather in the midst of some of the greatest art produced in America that is a testimony to the Black experience. Paul Robeson said that artists are the gatekeepers of truth. We are civilization's radical voice. I say that artists are the vanguards of truth, and these artists who have brought their work to this space today stand in the grand artistic traditions in Black history with those like Jacob Lawrence, Edmana Lewis, Augusta Savage, and Gordon Parks, and Jean-Michel Baptiste. There is truth in art, and there is art and truth. So as you stand back and gaze upon the brilliance of all this Black artistic genius, don't lose sight of the meaning. This art stands as an investigation into truth, an ode to Black lives lost, and an inquiry into American injustice. Because society is broken and artists act as the craftspeople who fit together those broken pieces, joining us together to answer the fundamental question of what does it mean to be human? And when I look at this art, I am filled with some fundamental questions. And in this moment, I pose those questions to you. What kind of risk are you willing to take for justice? Is America capable of affirming Black humanity? I am hopeful that we can. But just like artists have come together with a variety of viewpoints, visions, and voices to render Black injustice visible, we need to come together in solidarity from a variety of different viewpoints, places, and backgrounds to render Black injustice invisible. Not because we refuse to acknowledge it, but because enough of us have said enough. That time when we come together as a nation, together in a movement to end injustice. It has been said that time heals all wounds, but oh, how untrue that is, because for the Black lives lost here in Louisville and across the nation, we still bear the scars, we still see the scars, and we still feel the scars, so the pain might lessen, but it never goes away. It was James Baldwin who said, we are trapped in history and history is trapped in us. So there is pastness in the present and we can never forget how we got here or those who came before us. There is despair in remembering, yes. because it reminds us of how the brutal conditions in which so many Black souls were taken from us. But we can also find hope in remembrance, because when we remember those who are gone, they never really are gone. By remembering them, they remain with us.
Hi, my name is Davóne Tines, and I'm excited to share with you the video VIGIL, which was made in honor of Breonna Taylor. I come from the classical music world, and a lot of my experience has been in traditional opera, but some of my most rewarding work has happened when I've been able to make things with my friends and colleagues that actually talk about our lived experiences. About a year ago, I was invited by Los Angeles Opera to make a video, and instead of doing something more traditional, I decided to speak about how I was feeling at the time. Breonna Taylor had been murdered, and also George Floyd, and I was sitting with my brother in our home in Raleigh thinking about what I could actually sing that I connected to. A song that I had written a few months prior to that was then called Chorale, came to mind. The words are, "Where there is darkness, we'll find light." So I thought at this time that's exactly what I wanted to say. I made a video that had a lot of different imagery of vigils that were in honor of George Floyd and also of Breonna Taylor, and I interspliced those with images of me singing the song. But after that video premiered with the LA Opera, I realized from a letter from a white patron of mine that they may have engaged in that video as if it was trauma porn. Now, trauma porn is when somebody is able to engage in the pain of another, but that engagement does not lead to change. I was horrified that this could actually be the reaction to the work I was making. I knew I had to do something different with the video I was making. So I had an opportunity to make something new for Lincoln Center. I decided to take out all of the imagery of vigils because I didn't think that a predominantly white liberal elite audience should be let off the hook by engaging in the coping mechanisms of the Black community. I decided that it would be more impactful to invite people into the idea of what they could do to make change. And in order to do that, I had to make people emotionally present with the tragedy that they were engaging. So instead of all of these images, I replaced it with simple sentences that equate an embodiment exercise, because I deeply believe that if you're present in your body, you can then be present in your mind. After we go through the entire song with this embodiment exercise, I reintroduce a phrase that is very common to us in our current situation. And hopefully in this context, the audience can more deeply engage what is felt instead of all of the hype that's been built around this idea. I then offer very clear steps on how to engage this emotion and allow it to fuel change. Enjoy the video.
Darkness, we'll bring light. Where there is darkness, we'll bring light.
Hi, I'm Tricia, and I'm founder of the NAP Ministry. And I'm so excited to be here to speak about the guided meditation that I created for this brilliant and powerful exhibition. I'm so honored that I was asked to be a part of it. So powerful, and I really it took me a while to come together with what I wanted to do for this. When Allison reached out to me, I was so um, honored and taken aback in a lot of ways because the Breonna Taylor case and the entire story of her life really was something that really touched home with me for a lot of reasons. There's so many ways for Black people to be triggered in this country, so many ways that we have been traumatized. It's a daily occurrence. It's a ongoing occurrence. I can remember when Trayvon Martin was killed and how earth-shattering that was, and how many of us are still healing from that. And there's this collective idea of grief that I believe sits in us. And I believe that grief is really a moment that is sacred. And I believe that we really don't give opportunity for us to grieve in this country. This country does not know how to grieve among so many things. And so I've been silently grieving the Breonna Taylor case since it happened. It's been really hard for me to process it. I haven't said much about it online. Even when it happened, I didn't post much about it on the NAP Ministries page. It really shook me to the core. And at the same time it happened, we were dealing with George Floyd and the uprisings. But that case really, for a lot of reasons, shattered me. And for it's two really important reasons, because number one, she was sleeping while when she was murdered by the police. And so the fact that my calling and this work and the whole idea of the NAP ministry as a meditation, as this political and social justice movement, pushing back against crime culture, pushing back against the idea that we are human machines for the system, really giving space and honoring the idea that Black people have rest as a birthright, that we rest as a human right. It's not something that we have to earn. And so sleep really is something that is so dear to me. I've kind of created my entire career at this point around this idea of sleep being sacred. And so for this young woman to be murdered while she was sleeping, so many ideas came to me. Was she dreaming? How far was she in sleep? Was she in the REM sleep? Was she deeply exhausted at the moment? How hard was she sleeping? How deep was her sleep that day? And so that shattered me to the core, to think of someone being traumatized, even in a moment when they're trying to sleep, at their most vulnerable moment, at this moment of care, at this moment of pause, when we believe that resting and sleeping is really a portal that we can go into to imagine, to heal, to dream, this dream space. And so her being in a dream space and white supremacy attacking her and snatching her out of that dream space really shattered me to the core. And also another reason is because me and Breonna share a birthday. My birthday is June 5th, and so is hers. And so it touched me in a way that I don't think any of the other hundreds of murders of Black people by police has done. It really, she's a Black woman, I'm a Black woman. It really just shattered me. And so it took a while for me to come to a place to be able to know what I wanted to do for the meditation. But when I spoke with Allison, I knew that this would be in the remembrance section of the exhibition, this idea that in order to hurt, to really acknowledge, to heal, we really have to acknowledge the hurt, and having a space and these affirmations of care. So I really wanted to provide a space, a pause, an intentional moment for people as they are experiencing the exhibition, to have a guided moment, for there to be space to breathe, for us to uplift silence, for there to be this collective grief moment, to catch our breaths. And really, that's what I wanted for it. I wanted it to be a space that we could remember together that our bodies and our lives are divine, and even in our alive moments, in our moments when we are no longer in this dimension, all of these are divine moments, and to really uplift the body as sacred, to lift all bodies as sacred, but to specifically uplift the idea of Black bodies being sacred, them being divine, of them being able to touch and navigate and shape shift into ways that we still probably have not tapped into yet. And so I started off really just uplifting that this is imagination work. And so I think the work of resting and sleeping and the work of art and the work of community care is really a moment of imagination, a moment of really imagining a new way, imagining this new idea, imagining a way that we can really see a new place. I believe resting is imagination work. I believe it gives us a moment to be able to go into a portal, highly influenced by Afrofuturism, influenced by somatics. And so knowing that our bodies are a site of liberation, that wherever our bodies are, we can find rest, we can find care, we can find a connection to the divine that we can't find in our awake moments. And so to connect that with Breonna Taylor's life and the moment in which she left this dimension, when she was murdered and in her sleep, is such a heartbreaking, shattering moment. But I also wanted to uplift the divinity of her and the divinity of her life, and this peaceful moment of sleep, and how even in our death, I believe that we are still divine. And so I'm imagining Breonna Taylor and her legacy still being divine, and the divinity of us coming together to celebrate her life and to really imagine and examine her life in a way. And so that's why I feel like this exhibition is so important, why I feel deeply honored to be a part of it, to offer this moment and space for people to come through and listen to my voice and listen to this sacred idea of stopping, of pausing, of breathing, of continuing to breathe. And I repeat in the meditation a lot, thank you for living. Thank you for existing. Thank you for resting. Thank you for resisting. And this idea of deep gratitude for all of us, and this deep gratitude for this moment that we can stop and see rest as divine, see care as divine, see remembrance as divine, see being a witness as divine, seeing the promise of now and the promise of the future. And so I started the recording by simply just sketching out an outline, and just really wanted to make it a trance moment, a moment where people can actually go into a rested trance state. They can log on through their phones, through the app, and push the button and download and listen to my voice slowly for over 6 minutes, maybe 6 minutes and 18 seconds, leading and guiding and making space for this sacred moment. And so I started off wanting to create a trance, wanting to, no matter where you were, if you were standing in the museum, if you were listening from home, if you were reflecting, after you left the museum, I really think it's so important that the Speed Museum has offered these educational resources so that this exhibition can live on, and it's not just this static moment that is taken down in June, but that it continues to live in our brains and in our minds and in our spirits. And so I wanted this meditation to be that. I really wanted it to be that. And so I'm so honored and grateful, and I hope that you guys enjoy it and see it as a space and a moment for care. We will rest.
We are the Afrophysicists, and the music that we do is Afrobeat. This first song that we're going to do is by the great Fela Kuti, and it is Sorrow, Tears, and Blood. them regular trademark, regular trademark. That is why everybody run, run, run. Everybody scatter, scatter. Some people lost some bread, some went dead, died. Police they come, mommy they come. Confusion everywhere. 7 minutes later, all the good umbrella. Oh, this done go away. Are you done disappear? Them need sorrow, tears, and blood. Them regular trademark. Them regular trademark. Them regular trademark. They say serve and protect, but does this feel like protection? Feels like they're crushing a foreign insurrection. They say serve and protect, but why do they call it protection? They think that they're the cure and we are the infection. They say serve and protect, but it doesn't look like protection. Take a nation hostage and demand affection. They say serve and protect, but you know this ain't protection when you best say yes sir, no sir with the proper inflection and the right complexion. Maybe a respectful genuflection. Is this protection? Who's gonna protect us from this protection? Yeah. Do anything for their brothers in blue, but if you ain't blue, face a consequence. The blue wall of silence covers up their violence. They've got qualified immunity to brutalize our community. Swear no to uphold the law, but when it's a cop that's all out the door, say no evil, that's the game. Or meant by another name. 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 'Cause they got no shame. No. Why are you so threatened by our freedom to assemble? Why do the people's voices make the police tremble? Is your dainty little ego so fragile it might shatter? Why does it hurt you when the people tell you Black Lives Matter? Why does it hurt you when the people tell you Black Lives Matter? Why does it hurt you when the people say that Black Lives Matter? Why does it hurt you when the people say that Black Lives Matter? Why does it hurt you when the people tell you Black Lives Matter? Thank you.